Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lydia, and I'm the youth pastor here, and I'm one of the school missional chaplains. I get to go in school with Becky and the team and do great work with our young people. When you heard that reading, you might have felt like I felt when I got it, when I was preaching on it. And you might have thought, it's a bit heavy for a 4 p.m. service. If you were at the adults retreat and you came home feeling full of hope and joy, and you felt that disappear when you heard that passage, I can only apologise. But we're going to try and unpack it together. I've got 2 encouragements for us as we do this. The first is, if you heard it and we're just filled with questions and more doubt, and you're like, Jesus, what are you even saying? Then that's okay, and that's part of the journey of being a disciple. And recognizing that tension is okay, and it's what we do with it that's important. We either let it overwhelm us, confuse us, and stunt our journey with Jesus. We throw in the towel and say, I'm not even going to try and unpack that because that just feels too hard. Or we come to Jesus because Jesus doesn't mind when we have questions, when we have those doubts, when we don't get it. In fact, he loves it when we come to him with our questions and our confusion, when we choose to seek him in the midst of the difficult things that we hold in tension. And the second encouragement I want to give to you is some hope for the next few minutes. As I have journeyed with this passage that I originally read, I thought, goodness, I don't know how I'm going to talk about this and bring some hope. But actually, I've really found the good news of Jesus in it, and I've found the hope in it, and hopefully by the end of this you'll also feel a little bit of hope as well. So I think it's really helpful if we start with some context for the passage. I think the context of the passage helps, is like the keys of the hope. So a bit of a history lesson for you, but I won't go on for a long time about history, don't worry. But I'm going to set the scene for you. So we're in 70 AD. So 70 years after Jesus has died and rose again. And Mark, the disciple, is writing his gospel. And also in 70 AD is the destruction of the temple. So these 2 things are happening at the same time. So Mark is writing this account of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. He's writing the words that Jesus spoke about the destruction of the temple, just as he's witnessed it come to pass. And as I was thinking about this, I was imagining the disciples kind of scrambling together and being like, hey, do you remember that weird day when Jesus was going on about all them crazy things? He said something about this thing that we've just seen, right? And the disciples have witnessed this event that's uprooted them, that's changed how they worshipped, that's changed all that they knew. And so they're trying to remember what Jesus has said to them about this thing. They're trying to remember that in verse 31, he says that heaven and earth will pass away, but that his words will never pass away. They're trying to remember that in verse 11, Jesus promises the Holy Spirit. Remembering Jesus' words and finding comfort in them as all is changing around them. Mark is asking a question, and he's looking at what Jesus says about how do we go through change. It's a hard question for the believers of the day, and I think it's a hard question for us too. The temple being destroyed changes so many things. The Jewish people had to significantly change how they worshipped, how they practiced their faith. So the synagogues become the center of worship. They can no longer do sacrificial worship, so they can't do any animal sacrifice. And in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, there are 613 laws. And scholars estimate that around 100 of those laws are to do with animal sacrifice. And they had to be performed in the temple. So they can't do this. So this alone is a major shift for them. After the destruction of the temple, Jewish worship shifted significantly. They adapted to new circumstances. They had to gather more locally and had to gather for prayer, Torah study, community, life. It was a really big shift, and it really shifted for Christianity as well. The destruction of the temple meant that Christianity grew further away from Judaism. It encouraged its growth among non-Jews, and it shaped its theological outlook. This is a significant moment in history. And Jesus, in this passage, is preparing the disciples for the change that will come. Not just with the temple, but the significant upheavals and dark times. Jesus is kind of laying it all out there, so at the end of it, they can't say, hey, Jesus, you never told us it was going to be... He's telling them everything, as much as he knows. I was joking with someone in the office that in that passage it says that not even the Son knows when this stuff's... And here I am, like, trying to prepare and preach on something that Jesus doesn't even know is going to happen. It's crazy. So when the temple is not there anymore, Jesus is saying, don't worry. I know you can't do your legalistic ways, the ways you do things, the ways that you love me, like reading the Torah, like cleansing. And you do it because you love me. You do these things because you love me. You tithe and you go to the temple. And I know you want to keep doing those things. You want to keep loving me. But Jesus is saying, don't worry. There's a new way of doing things. Things are changing, but I'm with you in the change. I've been thinking a lot about change as I've been preparing this. And as I've been having this conversation with people, I've had like two things while I've been chatting about this passage. First of all, people have like giggled when I've told them the title of this passage. And like a giggle of, I'm glad you're preaching on that and not me. And then they've either said two things to me. They've either said, oh, I hate change. Like, I'm not good with change. And I agree with those people. Then there's been weird people who say, oh, I love change. And those people have been really weird. But what I discovered about those people is that they don't actually love all change. They like a nice change that they can control. And so they like to like move their bedroom around, or they like to like get a haircut, or, you know, they like nice fluffy change, but they don't like the change that like uproots their whole life. And I was thinking about this in 2009, 2 days after Matt's 18th birthday, in the early hours of the morning, our dishwasher went on fire. Don't put your dishwasher on overnight. It's not a good idea. But it went on fire and we had to move out for, I don't know how long, but it was a significant change in our life, and the house got redecorated, and it was really significant. And that wasn't a fun change. Like, yeah, it was nice that the house got redone, but it wasn't fun and it wasn't nice, and it uprooted our lives. We like the change that we can control, but we don't like change that we can't control. And I think in this passage, Jesus is giving us some keys of how to stand strong in him in the midst of change, and not the fun change of like getting a fresh haircut, but the change that flips all that we know on its head. The change that uproots and leaves us with rubble and questions. So there's your context for the passage and a bit of a history lesson. And now we're going to get into the passage. So at the very start of the passage, the disciples are marveling at the temple, a significant building in their lives, a very impressive building. It stood tall. Historians say that the temple covered 450 acres of land. It had 10 entrances, it had courtyards, and at the heart of the temple was the Holy of Holies. And in the Holy of Holies is where the presence of God dwelt. And only certain people at certain times could go into the Holy of Holies. This building was magnificent, and it looks unshakable. And the disciples are marveling at it. They're excited about it. I imagine the disciples are thinking, this is great. The temple's great. Jesus is here. He's healing people. He's like, this is great. It couldn't get better than this. And they're putting their hope in those things. They're looking at the earthly success. And Jesus very quickly brings a warning to them in verse 2. He says, do you see all these great buildings? Not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. Jesus is saying to the disciples, these stones, are not the foundation that you think they are. And you're only going to get through with me as your firm foundation. I think Jesus is giving a warning about what we're putting our hope in. What are we building our lives on? Because we can build on things that look good and impressive, but will they last when they're shaken? You can build your life around a good career, chasing after the things that the world says will make you strong and unshakable. The things that the world says, if you just have this, you'll look stronger. But what happens when it's shaken? When the change that uproots comes? Because what the disciples were putting their hope in, it looked really strong. It looked stable. But ultimately, what they put their hope in was wrecked. Not one stone will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. And as we look ahead in Mark, just a few chapters, we see Jesus being betrayed, denied, and crucified. And in these moments, it looks like all is lost. Jesus even says in verse 25 that the heavenly bodies will be shaken. But here's the difference between putting our hope in things like the temple and putting our hope in Jesus. Jesus looked shakeable. The cross looked like defeat. But we know the end of the story. That Jesus rose again, defeating death. Last week when we looked at chapter 12, we read in verses 10 and 11, Jesus quoting Psalm 118, "The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Jesus is our firm foundation, an unshakable cornerstone. But as we read this passage and we get into it more, Jesus isn't promising this easy breezy, stand firm on me and all will be well. Verses 7 and 8, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There'll be earthquakes in various places and famines, and these are the beginning of birth pains. But in all of this, Jesus makes two promises. Two promises that can sustain us, that hold us in the shaking. The first promise is in verse 11. Jesus says, "Whenever you're arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what to say. Just say whatever is given you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit." Jesus is promising the Holy Spirit. In John chapter 14, Jesus promises the Holy Spirit who will be an advocate to help and to be with us, to speak when we're under trial. Jesus also promises the Holy Spirit when he's commissioning the disciples in Matthew 28. He says, "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." Surely I am with you. With the command to go and do comes a promise. Surely I am with you. Through the trials, through the change, through the uprooting, surely, surely I am with you. Jesus is reminding the disciples and us that as we watch these things happen, as we see the things that we thought were unshakable crumble before us, Jesus is reminding us, surely I am with you. Put your hope in me, the one who's unshakable, the one who's the cornerstone, the one who rose again and defeated death. Put your hope in me. And the second promise is in verse 31. It says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Jesus' words are true and dependable. Jesus is the ultimate promise keeper. We can trust that he is the cornerstone, that he is a firm foundation. We can trust that he is faithful, that he is the Prince of Peace, that he loves us, that his grace is sufficient, and so much more, because heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will never pass away. In the times of trials and change, the change that uproots all that we know, we need to take hold of the promises Jesus has spoken over us. In times in my life, I've held on to John chapter 14, verse 27, where Jesus says, my peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your heart be troubled, and do not be afraid. I've held on to those promises of Jesus, promising peace. What are the verses, the words, the promises that Jesus has spoken over your life? What are the things that he has spoken in you? What were the things that he called you into that maybe have got lost along the way, got lost in the time of the change and the uprooting? What do we need to call back to mind, to hold on to and remember? Because his words will never pass away. Through all of this passage, there's one thing that changes everything. One thing that gives us hope. At the end of all that Jesus talks about in this passage, and it's in verses 26 and 27. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and great glory. And he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. The Son of Man coming with great power and great glory. Jesus will return in great power and great glory. He will come again. And when he comes again, his promise is he's going to make everything new again. He's going to restore. He's going to revive. Make all things new. Revelation 21 says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost, from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. This is good news for us today, that Jesus has risen again, that he is on the throne, and that he will come again, and he will make all things new. This is what Jesus promises in the midst of this world that we live in, where verse 8 is our reality. War and rumors of war, nation against nation, earthquakes and disaster. There is an encouragement for us today to fix our eyes on Jesus in the midst of it all. in the midst of the change that uproots, in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the things that we see that break our heart, the things that make us question where Jesus is, that make us question the way forward, fixing our eyes on the one who is faithful, whose words will never pass away. I've had this image in my head of when Peter walks on the water, and when he gets out the boat, his eyes are fixed on Jesus. And while his eyes are fixed on Jesus, he's like buzzing, walking on the water, no problem. And as soon as he starts to notice, hey, this is a bit weird, I'm stood on the water and I'm walking, and his eyes like go away from Jesus, he starts to sink. When he looks around at the waves, when he can feel the wind batting against him, suddenly he starts to sink. But when his eyes were fixed on Jesus, he was walking. And so I'm not saying that it's easy for us to just fix our eyes on Jesus. Sometimes it's the hardest thing for us to do. To make ourselves pray, to make ourselves open our Bible. But when we fix our eyes on Jesus, we can walk on the water towards him, fixing our eyes on the one who's faithful, the one that we can trust, the one we can put our hope in, because he's the only one who's an unshakable foundation, the only one, the one who stays the same through change, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Keep your eyes on him. And some days that might look like a desperate cry. Some days that might look like sitting in silence with him. The sovereign God in the midst of change. Whilst I was writing this preach, I was struck with the fact that it's actually really good news for us that the temple has been destroyed. I was thinking about how God's presence was just in the Holy of Holies. And when Jesus died and the curtain to the Holy of Holies was torn in two, it meant God's presence was on the loose. God's presence was breaking out. And so when we see the reality of the things that Jesus talks about in Mark 13, we can have confidence because the King of life is on the move, even here, even now. Over the adults retreat, I had this, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And then I was struck with, well, I have the Spirit of the Lord in me, and so wherever I am, there is freedom. And so that means I walk in freedom all the time. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. This passage is good news for us, and it's not always easy. But I think we can take encouragement from the lives of Christians who lived through the reality of some of this passage and still kept their eyes on Jesus. Corrie ten Boom, a Holocaust survivor, imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp for hiding Jews. Her sister died in the camp, and she forgave her captors and traveled the world sharing a message of God's love and forgiveness. The Apostle Paul is persecuted and imprisoned. He's beaten, shipwrecked, imprisoned, and he's eventually martyred for preaching the gospel. And yet when you read through what he wrote in the New Testament, it's full of teaching about endurance and joy in suffering. And so as the band come up, I want us to think about how we can respond to this passage. And I think there's a few things to think about. The first is, what are you putting your hope in? The disciples were putting their hope in the temple, but it was shakeable and it crumbled. What are you putting your hope in? And maybe it's time that you put your hope in Jesus again. Jesus, the unshakable, the unfazable, the promise keeper. Maybe You need to bring to mind the verses, the words, the promises that Jesus has spoken over your life, that you need to hold on to and remember that his words will never pass away. What do you need to call to mind? What do you need to let Jesus remind you of today? Maybe you need to fix your eyes again. And maybe that looks like just saying once again, God, here I am. God, I'm here. And life feels rubbish and messy and I can't see you, but I'm here. I fix my eyes again. This morning in the prayers before the service, we were talking a lot about trust. And this word just kept coming up, and Phoebe had a word about when you put your phone torch on, and it kind of just lights up a little bit. It's not like a magnificent light that helps. It just kind of lights up the next step. But as we step into that, God then lights up the next step and the next step. And there's a trust there. It's scary to take a step when you don't know what the next step is. But God is trustworthy. He will lead you in his path. But you just have to take that first step. And that first step. Shall we stand together? We're going to pray together, and then we're going to sing, and we're going to do some communion. But if you want to respond, this is the moment. If you feel like you need some prayer, don't let the moment pass you by. Jesus, we thank you that you are good, that you are trustworthy, that we can trust in you, that we can put our hope in you. And Jesus, we choose to put our hope in you again. Fresh hope in you, the unshakable. Jesus, would you bring to mind the things that you've spoken over us, the promises that you've had over our lives, because your word will never pass away. Would you help us to fix our eyes on you again? God, we say, here I am. Would you show me where you are? Would you help me to fix my eyes on you? Help me to take that step, trusting that you will light